Namaskar, welcome to sequential reading of Paradevta, God the Mother, book by Swami Shri Ishwarananda Giriji Maharaj. With his grace and blessings, we enter into the second chapter. It is Atma-Devata, the Lord's inner court. And I would mention for those of you who want to have your own personal PDF copy of the book, website Samvit Samvad will help you reach to that goal. We begin second chapter, Atma-Devata, the Lord's inner court. In his Saundarya Lahari, Sri Shankara addresses the Divine Mother and says, "Here are the gods of creation, sustenance, etc., and you are with them as their consort. As the power invoked in them, yet you are something unlike anything, something whose glory is beyond comprehension and without limits. Turiya kapitvam duradhigam niha sima mahima." That is the conclusion of a philosophical, or we may even say a scientific search into the ultimate cause of creation. It leads one from a subtle principle to a subtler one, evoking awe and wonder at each step, while at the same time increasing the sadhaka's awareness of his own personal inadequacy to grasp it. The mystic alone can accept and comprehend the mother's incomprehensibility and limitlessness. To him, the truth of his experience is unlike anything that is categorized. It eludes all ordinary rules of perception and confounds the scholars. So, to differentiate it from the logical God Brahma and the ordinary powers of illusion Maya, Sri Shankara speaks of Parabrahma and Mahamaya, the absolute and the inscrutable. However, this reality is present in every pore of creation and palpable in every pulsation of it. Hence, Sri Shankara adds to the above statement, Mahamaya Vishwam Brahma Mayasi Parabrahma Mahishi. Since the power of Parabrahma is behind universal life, the mystic dares to attempt a method of cognizing the incognizable, of measuring the immeasurable, and that is upasana or worship. Vedanta believes in the dictum upasakanam karyartham brahmano rupa kalpana. For the sake of the worshipper's fulfillment, the Brahma Tattva lends itself to the imagining of certain forms. That imagination should be such as to help one to see a totality, samashti, expressing itself in the limitedness of the individualized form, vyashti, and then to go beyond even the totality to glimpse the oneness that holds all manifestation. That is the mystic vision. Since the Vyashti Samashti Akya Chintana is the basis of all Upasana, here also, having considered the Samashti form of the mother, we will proceed to invoke and adore it in the Vyashti form of the individual soul. After having depicted Godhood in the Adhideva aspect in the first shloka, the Devi Bhujanga proceeds to describe the Adhyatma form in the second shloka. In the last chapter, we ascended to the truth that is beyond the fringes of the universe, the supreme radiance from which these billions of nebula emerges. Now we descend to discover that same essence in the depth of our own heart. The description is designed to project the harmony between the two dimensions. In the first meditation, we had the five cosmic powers, Pancha Brahma as the pedestal. Here in the second meditation, we have the Pancha Kosha, the five sheets of individuality. That was Mahananda Peeth. This is Mahayoga Peeth. That was Samuddha, supreme aloft. This is Nigudha, deeply embedded. There we explored Lord Shankara's Advaita. Here we enter his Antahpura, the inner court. In this way, the poet skillfully weaves together the pleasant variations of the theme, suggesting their deep interconnectedness to express the unification of soul and God, to produce the pattern of truth experience, Akhandanubhuti. The entire poem thus becomes a Mahavakya like Tattvamasi, set to a delightful tune called Bhakti. I bow down to the inner court of Shiva, this destroyer of the Tripuras, Pure re ranta Puram Naumi Nityam. This is the main sentence in the present verse. Pura re rathanta Puram Naumi Nityam. Here the words seem to have been selected with almost a deliberate intent to confuse, whereas the apparent self contradiction is actually a device to reveal the depth of thought. The destroyer of the cities has, all the same, his own inner city, and Antahpura contains the pleasure gardens and private apartments of a monarch. But mischievously, we are reminded that this inner court belongs to one who is Purari, the detester and destroyer of cities. How can Shiva, the Purari, have an Antahpura? The only reconciliation possible is this, that the Pura which Shiva opposes is the Bahipura. Since he resorts to and exults in the Antepura, the Bahipura again is sometimes called the Tripura. This should not be confused with the Tripura in the Traipuram Mahaha of the last verse. Here it denotes the threefold divisions of worldly perception, that is, the knower, the known, and the means of knowing, the ego, the object, and the senses. It is more commonly known as Triputi. This is external seeing of extroversion. Such a seeing hides the integral and eternal nature of consciousness. Shiva, the liberator and enlightener, destroys this tendency in those mature minds that aspire after Atma-Jnana. Therefore, the Shiva Sahasranama adores him as Bahirmukha Maha Darpana Sine. The Lalita Sahasranam too has the same idea. Antaramukha Samaradhya Bahirmukha Sudurlabha. The Antaramukhatha or inward perception of unitive knowledge is the Antahpura in which Shiva's blissful form is revealed. We have to enter this inner apartment in order to meet the queen of Shiva, the Brahma Mahishi. But first of all, we have to discover the apparent. The only path to it is Mahayoga, which is secretly laid within layer after layer of existence. Yada na di bhihi panchabhihi kosha jalene nigudhe. The present meditation is based upon a close study of these five koshas as we see them in a practical and typical specimen, the human body. First of all, before we explore these sheaths of the soul, let us grasp the hint given in the word Mahayoga Pita. Here, yoga means self inquiry. Usually, yoga is translated as union, but that is secondary. According to the generally accepted tradition in the interpretation of Sanskrit words, a particular meaning which has gained currency through wide usage of a word, Rudyartha, should get preference over the ontological meaning derived from the word structure. The Rudyartha of yoga is samadhi, a state in which all dirt and disturbances of the mind are completely eliminated and the light of the soul shines peerless and unrestricted. According to Patanjali's system, this is achieved by restraining all mental modifications through a particular specialized process called Sanyama, which forms the last three stages of the Ashtanga Yoga. But Vedanta holds that Atma Vichara is sufficient for the pure minded and sincere aspirant to attain to the state of yoga. Actually, this Vichara itself deepens and becomes Samadhi, which in its true sense is Sanyag, Samyag Adhiyate Sarvam Yasmin Iti, that in which everything is well placed and is at rest. It is not a state of mind, but the natural, uncorrupted state of consciousness in perfect poise. In our own times, Ramana Maharshi most consistently and convincingly advocated self inquiry alone as the means for enlightenment. So, an aspirant need not be afraid of samadhi and the means to achieve it. He can dare to attempt it through self inquiry. But this inquiry is not an ordinary intellectual exercise or a philosophical speculation. The prefix Maha attached to yoga here demands our attention. The yoga which yields Mahat Phalam, great result, is Mahayoga. And what is the great result except the attainment of the great, the Brahma Tattva? We have to our support many such expressions in the minor Upanishads. Koham kathamidam kim va katham marana janamani vicharayantare vetha mahatatat phala me yasyasi annapurnopanishad. Who am I? What is this world and how did it came into being? How did it come into being? How is the soul born and what is its death? How are birth and death connected with the soul? If you thus inquire within, you will attain to great fruits. The fruits of external inquiry, the greatest inventions and innovations of science, however, glamorous and momentous at the time, turn out to be positively harmful or eventually fade into insignificance. The same can be said about psychic exploits of an ordinary hatha yogi. The extraordinary powers of yoga that dazzle extrovert minds slowly dwindle and leave the miracle monger all the more rest for it. We have to differentiate Mahayoga from all this. It is distinguished not only by its roots but also by its very method and the motivation for it. This yoga is great also in the sense that only very rare aspirants are attracted to it. The common run of people, even the religious, prefer either the path of sense gratification or the path of sense denial. With all their zeal and application, people are oblivious of the larger facts of life looming before them, of the inevitability of death, of the origin and meaningfulness of creation, which are subjects which demand constant vichara. According to Mahayoga teachers, each one of us has to take up this inquiry himself and not expect to be benefited by the data collected or discoveries achieved by other enlightened men of the past, as it happens in the field of material science. That very same truth which Vamadeva or Vashishta discovered has to be realized anew by every sadhaka. He has to go all the way again, all by himself. This makes Mahayoga at once creative and challenging, difficult for the dull and the lazy, irresistible for the one with stuff and sincerity, for the sadhaka who seeks to stand on his own to realize the fullness of life. Compared to this, the other attempts of the worldly minded and the religious, or those of the world renouncing hermit, are both deceptive and one sided. All their offerings or austerities are fraught with constant distractions of the continuously clamoring outside world. According to Mahayoga, the pertinence and power of the inward life have to be discovered to give meaningful movement to external life. The discovery of the soul at its root existence should enrich all its life extensions. But how many dare to question the nature of birth and death? If anyone does, he is considered a dhira or a hero, even if he be a mere boy like Nachiketas of the Upanishads and he enters into Mahayoga. When Nachiketas requested the king of death, his guru, to instruct him in Atma Swarupa Yama after having been convinced of the disciple's Shraddha, Vairagya, sharpness of intellect, and sincerity, declared Kamasyapatam Jagatah Pratistham Kratorananyamabhyasa Param Stomama Ha Drugyam Pratishtham Drishtva Drityo Dhiro Nachiketotya Srakshaha. Or Nachiketas, having seen the state of Hiranyagarbha in whom all desires are realized, he is the support of the world, who is the inestimable fruit of all upasana, who is the other shore, the basis of fearlessness, who is the adorable, great, and extensive refuge, who constitutes the highest position. In short, having analyzed all the attainable enjoyments, you have courageously rejected them. You have been you being endowed with spiritual insight. Tum durdarsham gudha manu pravishtam guhyatim gahvareshtam puranam adhyatma yoga dhigamena devam matvadhiro harasa sokyu jahiti. That self-illuminous principle which you desire to know is too difficult to perceive. Being deeply embedded in the core of this psychophysical mechanism of world perception, only the persevering pure intellect comprehends it through Adhyatma Yoga and goes beyond the joys and sorrows of a bound existence. That is the yoga taught here, and since it is Adhyatma Yoga, it teaches the process to go within. How far within should one go? Sri Shankara answers, Antarantaha. Go on penetrating layer after layer till you reach fullness, the experience of Supreme Self beyond which there is nowhere to go. Prakashatha and Paragati. To help this process through a methodical exercise of discrimination, the path of self penetration is demarcated into five layers called koshas. A kosha is a covering or a case. The Dhanakosha is the iron safe or self-safe deposit vault that encases money and other precious things. We try to make these structures as impregnable as possible. In spite of this, of course, there is no stopping of burglars, but God's wealth remains intact, being enshrined as the sole secret in the Panchakosha of all beings, from the firstborn Brahma down to the tiny wriggling worm. Only the yogi has been able to get at it by using the master key of Vichara. The method of Vichara that penetrates the innermost apartment is indicated by the master and the scriptures. They alone can lead us through the labyrinth of the self encasing koshas. Indeed, one of the implications of the name Mahayoga is that it is to be learned only from great souls. The Mahapurushas in the famous Bhagavad Gita episode of Jada Bharat, in the famous Bhagavad episode of Jada Bharat, the saint when implored by King Rahu Gana to be instructed into Atma Jnana merely says, Rahu Ganaita Pasha Nayati Nache Jaya Nirva Panda Grahadva Na Chandasi Naiva Jalagni Surya Irivina Mahat Pada Rajo Bhishekam. It cannot be attained by austerity, ritualistic sacrifice, donations, or Vedic knowledge. It cannot be had by any means other than immersing oneself in the dust of the feet of the great ones. The Taittiriya Upanishad speaks of how the expert guidance of Varuna and the sincere inquiry of his son Bhrigu helped the later to acquire Brahma Jnana. This three text of Sri the Krishna Yajurveda has become a classic on the subject. Swami Vidyaranya puts it neatly: Annada Bhyantaram Pranaha Pranabda Bhyantaram Manaha Tatah Karata Tato Bhokta Guha Sheyam Parampara. That is from Panchadashi. This is the series of caves, the physical, the vital, and the mental sheets, each lying within the preceding one. Beyond the mental is the Vijnana sheath that appears as the motivator, and the still deeper is the ego sheath, who is the enjoyer, the supreme owner of all the experiences. Almost all the Vedantic works have found the treatment of Panchakosha too important to be left out. Yet, despite its popularity, this theme needs elucidation. Most sadhakas indulge in merely reading the details of each kosha and repeating parrot like, I'm not this, I'm not that. Surprisingly, the simple fact that fails to be noticed by many is that the Upanishad does not speak of negation, but a meaningful acceptance of the koshas. What is demanded is not the denial of the sheets, but the transcendence of them. And to transcend these sheets, one must first accept, understand, exercise, and if possible, master them. All these ideas are compressed into that word, upasamkramana, used by the Taittiriya Upanishad, which is more meaningful than ever atikramana. This is in line with the Vedic view of life, which holds that you cannot afford to overlook even a bit of straw that lies on your path. If you do, you are in for trouble. It will assume the magnitude of a problem on some future date. Much energy and time can be saved if it is confronted now. Misuse and failures to use fully both retard or progress and create an atrophy of the spirit. In life, there should be neither an attempt to circumvent a problem nor an insistence upon a shortcut to solve it. You are allowed to go wherever you like, but if you seek your welfare, take care to see that wherever you put your step, the sole of your foot will kiss each particle of dust. And when it has felt in every pore the love and richness of the ground throbbing beneath, you may lift it and plant your next step forward. Thus, to the Vedic life is a devout worship, a deep feeling through which you gain unity with creation at every step and strength yourself by utilizing and mastering all available materials of life. If this is true of inert objects that come and go, how much more must it be true of the conscious instruments which you handle every moment of your life? For such are the koshas, from the physical body to the seed ego, all are living organisms. The Tatriya therefore insist on calling them Annamaya, Pranamaya, Manomayatma, Annamayatma, Pranamayatma, Manomayatma, and so on, and insist that you look upon them as forms of your own being. Read carefully the description of each kosha as given in the Brahmananda Valli of Tattri Upanishad. In the Bhrigu Valli following it, we are told how Bhrigu, the son of Varuna, realized through contemplation that which is the innermost essence of these five koshas. Keeping both these chapters in mind, you will be able to assess accurately the nature and purpose of the exposition. For example, in typical Samvit fashion, the Upanishad starts demonstrating the self as Anrasamayata, made up of the essence of food, by pointing out the head, the hands, the seat, and the heart. Only a living thing can be said to have these organs because it can think, grasp, get up, and go at will. So you are given to feel the flow of a free conscious energy in every movement of the physical body. In the mere fact of its existence, if this feeling is maintained as an awareness, you have practically transcended the body. You are freed from body consciousness. That is the secret. The more you try to forget the body or cast it into disregard, the stronger will be its hold upon you. The Yoga Vasishtha says, Bharo avivekina sastram bharo jnanam cha ragina asantasyamanu baro baro anatma vidam vapah. To the unenlightenment, his own body becomes too heavy to too heavy a burden to carry. That is to say, he finds all his time and energy spent in barely maintaining it. But one who dwells upon the Atma bears everything lightly and walks out on cheerfully. He overcomes his lower nature by awakening the higher one that preserves itself through the severest temptations effortlessly, like blades of grass in a storm. A very senior Swami of the Ramakrishna order narrated to me an incident that happened when he met Girish Ghosh, the celebrated Bengali dramatist, and a classic example of a sinner transformed into a saint by the touch of a saint. Sri Ramakrishna, in this case, once Girish was asked in his ripe old age to speak about his master, he just raised his arm and said, "You see, Thakur is raising it, not I." And the profound look and voice of the man made a tremendous impact on the audience, driving home the point more forcefully than a thousand sermons. Girish had surrendered his little self completely to the Guru, the great self, and palpably felt the great power moving his limbs, lacking this contact with a deeper and vaster reality of the self which is treasured in the cave, the highest Akasha, Nihitam Guhayam Parame Vyoman. You may identify the power moving the physical body with the vital force prana. The Upanishad anticipates this and so allows you to go from Annamaya to Pranamaya and so on, step by step, till all the koshas are covered to accommodate an ordinary aspirant's gradual growth. Led by a searching sense of soulfulness, the aspirant arrives at the last kosha only to discover that its soul center is Ananda, which is one with Brahma, the basis of the Anandamaya kosha. Also, the aspirant is able to realize that this pure essence of Ananda has been pervading all the other outer koshas, manifesting differently as the various soul centers. Ananda is the yoga center of the Vijnanamaya, and that is the adesha or percept centered in manomaya, and that in its turn is the space center around which revolves the pranamaya, and that space is the physical heart of annamaya. Elsewhere it is clearly stated, ko ya vanyat kah prananyat yadesha akasha anando na syat. This aka is verily ananda. Otherwise, who indeed would breathe? Who would live? Thus, the physical, vital, mental, psychic, and ananda levels are all interconnected by one evolutionary principle and penetrated by one spiritual essence. The above observation can be taken as a guideline to understand the Upanishad's peculiar description of each kosha. It cannot be pinned to any definite single form of interpretation. Each sadhaka should derive his own inspiration. Only it is obvious that as you go inward, you become subtler and must naturally expand into a vaster field. I sit here and can stretch my hands. This much is the extent of my physical being. But through sight, smell, speech, hearing, and touch, I can transact with more things over a larger field. This field becomes enlarged vastly as I rise above the sense level to the purely mental. But to a person who has a developed insight and sight, there are the vaster fields of Vijnanamaya and Anandamaya. Let us remember that the basis, Pucham, of the former is Mahat. The first cosmic principle is in creation. Sri Shankara comments that the Vijnanamaya kosha of each being is connected to his this cosmic intelligence as trees and plants are to the soil on which they stand. This intelligence cannot be objectively grasped in the completeness by the individual. So we are asked only to meditate upon it. Do upasana of it as the very ground of our intellectual being. For this upasana, a considerable degree of intellectual purity and power is needed. This is manifested as Shraddha, Arita, and Satya, which are referred to as the various components of Vijnanamayata. Similarly, when we go to the innermost sheath of the Anandamaya, we almost lose all dimensions. The difference between the microscopic and macroscopic does not seem to exist. The individuality dissolves in one abstract sense of delight. Yet there are various shades to this delight. There is no objectivity, yet there is a sense of being contained. Emancipation seems to lie in tracing the source of delight. This anandatmata should feel its root nature. The Brahmapucham Pratishtha, which, as the eulogy that follows the description of the last sheet bears out, is a pure existence, Sanmatra, the pity of reality ripped of all tendencies to sprout to express itself. Here we pass from yoga to Mahayoga. Here we contact ourselves without touching and exist without exerting, even with a feeling. This is what Bhagwan Gaudapada calls Asparas Yoga, the peace and passive understanding. There is no process to it. The sadhana or sankramana for Anandamaya Kosha is not mentioned because of the ineffability of the experience at this stage. At the moment, we can say that it is complete surrender or dissolving into one's essence. Therefore, in the second shloka, Sri Shankara, having invoked the spiritual structure as Maha Yoga Pita, merely says, Puram Naumi Nityam. I bow down even to this innermost antehpur of Godhood. The Namaskara here is a very artistic expression. It does not mean any genuflection or movement of obeisance, physical, vocal, or mental. Here, the statement is in tune with the spirit of the Gita, in which the Lord says, Manmanava madbhakto madhyajimam namaskuru mame veshyasi yuktatvaevnatmanam matparayana. Fix your mind on me, the all-pervasive Vasudeva, be devoted to me, worship me, bow down to me, accepting me as the supreme goal, you will come to me, the self of all creatures. In India, Namaskara is the usual form of greeting anybody, and it is indicated by the joining of both the palms, finger upwards, and hands folded over one's heart. The most graceful and significant gesture is expressive of Advaita, the unity of all beings, which alone can be basis of the joy of living, of mutual transaction and participation. It is at the same time the hallmark of human perfection. Therefore, Namaskara, the simple form of greeting, is also a symbol of the highest sadhana. The Mahayoga of this shloka, Sri Krishna specifically mentions it as the essence or summing up of all the three main yogas, Jnana, Bhakti, and Karma. That gives us another insight into the term Mahayoga used here. It stands for the mystical approach of the Upanishads in which all forms of yoga find their relevant places. One of the minor Upanishads specifically mentions them Hato, Mantro, Layaschaiva, Raja Yogas Tatha, Smrtah, Ikaiva Chaturdha Brahma Mahayogo Bhidhiyate. This is coming from Mahopanishad. Hatha Mantra, Laya, and Raja are considered to be the four main forms of yoga or sadhaka. You must take them to be various aspects of the one single practice called Mahayoga. Hatha Yoga concentrates mainly upon various physical exercises meant to obtain immunity from external influences for the body. Bhagavan Patanjali in his Yoga Sutra claims that as Dvandva Bandha Bhigatha, resulting from the practice of asana, we may include yama, niyam, and pranayam on both sides of the asana sadhana and bracket them as Hatha Yoga. This helps to overcome Annamaya and Pranamaya sheaths. Mantra Yoga activates and elevates the Manomaya Kosha, while Laya Yoga or Raj or Dhyana Yoga obviously affects the Vijnanamaya. Raj Yoga or Jnana Yoga is undoubtedly the recognized means to transcend the limitation of the innermost kosha Anandamaya. How the salient features of all these yogas are amalgamated in the Samvit Sadhaka will become clearer in the following meditation. So that was the second chapter from the book Paradevta by Swami Shri Ishwarananda Giriji Maharaj, and we will have more chapters from the book. So stay tuned on Harama Studio, our own channel on YouTube, Harama Studio. So thank you very much. Pranams to Swamiji. Om Namah Parvati Pataya Har Har Mahadev. और उदय मात की जय, जय बोलो श्री सोमेश्वर महादेव की जय, जय श्री कृष्ण।